national anthems can be controversial because of nasty lyrics. But they can also run into trouble because of who wrote them. Politics can play a big part in anthem selection. Welcome back to this continuing series on national anthems, the worst songs in the world. My name is David Pate. I'm a broadcaster, writer and journalist in Halifax, Nova Scotia. We're continuing the alphabetic progression of anthems, working through the letter B. The national anthem of Belize is one of the few that hits the trifecta of being violent, sexist and religious. Almost every anthem manages at least one or two, but not many get all three. For violence, we have blood in the soil and the call for people to put on their armour and drive back the tyrants. And it doesn't actually say people, it's just the sons, so there's your sexism, along with talk of the nation's manhood. And God gets credit for watching over everything. The song isn't universally loved. There have been calls for more gender-neutral lyrics. The original lyrics described Belize as the land of the gods, but that was changed to land of the free, apparently out of concern that mentioning more than one god would offend Christians. The national anthem of Benin isn't one that's heard much outside the country. Benin has never won an Olympic gold medal, or indeed any kind of Olympic medal, or qualified for a World Cup, so most of us haven't had an opportunity to listen to the song. Perhaps the most extraordinary thing about the dawn of a new day is that it doesn't mention God. That's extraordinary because the composer and author of the song was a Catholic priest. The anthem does talk about mighty battles and the price paid in blood, but it also encourages citizens to be proud and calm, even when winds of anger and hate are blowing. And while sons are mentioned, guess what? Daughters don't get a look in. The national anthem of Bhutan has one of the best titles of any national song, The Thunder Dragon Kingdom. Bhutan is an ancient nation that managed to struggle along just fine without a national anthem until the king decided in 1953 that the country needed one. So it's not surprising that most of the song is about the king. The Buddha also makes an appearance, but it's interesting that the king is described as reigning over both spiritual and secular traditions. From the relatively peaceful anthem of Bhutan to the much more aggressive and death-loving song of Bolivia. It belongs to the classic tradition of post-Spanish colonial South American national songs. Operatic, which is hardly surprising given that the music was composed by an Italian, bombastic, lengthy, and above all convinced that the singers are ready to give up their lives. We swear to die before we would live as slaves, the people sing. The author of the lyrics certainly has solid patriotic credentials. He was one of the signatories to Bolivia's Declaration of Independence. There are just 3 UN member states that have anthems without lyrics. The first of them is Bosnia and Herzegovina, one of the nations that emerged from the violent collapse of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. The reason the anthem doesn't have lyrics exposes the whole problem with anthems. There are no words that everyone can agree on. Bosnia originally adopted a song, "You Are the One and Only," after independence in 1992. The music was traditional, the words written by a popular singer, Dino Merlin. Although the lyrics do mention God, they seem fairly innocuous as far as anthems go. You are the one and only, the only homeland I have. But in a country as damaged by war and ethnic divisions as Bosnia and Herzegovina, what is not mentioned is just as important. And the song makes no reference to any of the country's ethnic groups. So the country's Serb and Croat communities demanded a new anthem. With no possibility of any agreement on words, the United Nations imposed a music-only anthem as part of the peace deal that ended the Bosnian War. The tune was supposed to be temporary until the new Bosnian parliament could agree on a new anthem. But numerous attempts to decide on lyrics have failed miserably. Even proposed words like "we are going into the future together" haven't won support, presumably because some Bosnians don't actually want to go into the future together. So the song remains wordless. But even the music is divisive. The composer of the tune was a Bosnian Serb, which meant members of the other ethnic groups objected on principle. And even some Serbs were angry because one of their own had written an anthem for a state they didn't recognize. It remains one of the few anthems in the world that is occasionally booed by some of its own citizens. At some events, they don't even bother playing it. Which shows that maybe the best anthem for this country, or indeed any country, is this one. The anthem issue in Bosnia and Herzegovina shows that a national song can be all about politics. And politics also played a part in the selection of Botswana's anthem. The man who wrote it was the leader of the country's main opposition group in the lead-up to independence in 1966. The country's future rulers worried that a song with a political past wouldn't be supported by the people in the future. But "Blessed Be This Noble Land" was picked from a short list of submitted songs and first performed at the ceremony marking the end of British rule. And the composer wasn't leaving anything to chance. He actually submitted 2 songs. The other one was the runner-up. And despite concerns about being politically tainted, the anthem has endured. The song itself isn't any more controversial than your standard anthem, as long as you don't mind the appearance of God's strong hand, or lines that say, "Awake, O men, awake, and women close behind them stand." But hey, that's just regular anthem stuff. I suppose the women of Botswana should be grateful they get a mention at all. We're heading back across the Atlantic now to Brazil. Like many South American anthems, this one is dramatic, operatic, and lengthy. The tune is old. It was adopted when Brazil shed its monarchy in 1831. There were various attempts over the years to add lyrics, but nothing caught on. It took almost 100 years before the words, still sung today, were made official. In its full form, overture, 2 verses and chorus, Brazil's anthem can run almost 4 minutes. So it's been cut down for many official events like World Cup games and the Olympics. The words themselves, like a lot of anthems, are in part poetic and archaic, and even feature a line from one of Brazil's most famous poems. "Our forests have more life, our lives have more love." But if love doesn't win you over, then there's always the threat of violence. The anthem warns that Brazil's sons will not run from a fight and do not fear their own death. Kings and queens do love to believe they are one with the nation they rule and universally loved by their subjects. The most famous example of an anthem praising a monarch is God Save the King. But lots of countries with monarchies have similar songs, like Brunei. It's a tiny nation on the island of Borneo with huge wealth, thanks to oil and gas, and it's ruled by a sultan who has absolute control. So it's no surprise that its anthem is called God Bless the Sultan. It's impossible to know what the people of Brunei think of the anthem or their sultan, as the country is unencumbered by details like democracy, free speech, and elections. Monarchs aren't the only rulers celebrated in anthems. The writers of anthems for former communist states knew who the real boss was, which is why so many of them celebrated Stalin and Lenin. But when Stalin was denounced, that meant anthems praising him needed a rewrite. That's what happened in Bulgaria. That song served as Bulgaria's anthem from 1951 to 1964, when it was decided that lines like "How great is the son of Lenin and Stalin, whose unequaled splendor throws light on our way" were no longer appropriate. It was time for a new song, and Bulgaria has been through a few anthems, starting with this one. The music was based on a popular folk song. It was the anthem from 1886 to 1947 and the arrival of communism, when it was dumped because of its association with the former monarchy. The song itself didn't actually mention the Bulgarian Tsar. It was exceptionally violent, beginning with a river stained with blood and a widow wailing, fiercely wounded. But the communists didn't like it, so it was replaced with another violent song, which recalled the fight against the fascist bloody terror, which rather overlooks the fact that Bulgaria was allied with Nazi Germany. The anthem that Bulgaria adopted in 1964 went through a lot of committees and rewrites. Stalin and Lenin may have fallen out of favor, but a communist country during the Cold War couldn't ignore who was really in charge. So a verse was inserted promising that the country was with Moscow in war and peace under the leadership of the great Communist Party. That part isn't sung anymore. We'll wrap up the list of nations, beginning with B, in the next episode of The Worst Songs in the World.